We're live.
Hello,
Hello,
hello.
ladies. Happy Friday. So good to see you all.
Hello,
Happy
hello.
Friday.
Hey. Hey, ladies. Hey, sis. Welcome to Keep It Holy, sis, on this Friday afternoon. Today, we're going to keep it real, rooted, and holy. Okay. We have an amazing topic this evening. Something that a lot of us are dealing with in today's marital world. Okay. Discussion this evening is going to be the dynamics of a blended family. Okay. So when we think about blended family, most people talk about and think about blended families being a husband and a wife bringing children together. They don't have any children together, but there's another piece of that we're going to add to this discussion this evening as well, the in-laws. Just because you don't have blended family, you have children, you don't have children that's blended, you know that the in-laws have some ways to come on in and give their input. They want to dictate what goes on in your household. And so we've got some of those dynamics too that we're going to talk about. But before we get started, ladies, there's a couple of key verses that I want us to kind of focus on this evening. And so one of them is speaking about unity. Genesis 2:24, the two shall become one. Um, First of all, that's how God designed our marriage, right? And if you don't have that biblical foundation with unity, if that's not set, that's already going to be a challenge in your blended family, okay? Our second verse is going to be Proverbs 24:3 and 4, and it says, by wisdom, a house is built, okay? Blended families must be built on purpose and not emotion, okay? So sometimes we have those issues in our blended families because we're focusing on our emotions and we're not focused on the purpose of it. And then the last verse that we're going to kind of talk through this evening is going to be peace in the home, Colossians 3:13 and 14. Forgiveness is not optional. And in blended families, that's one of the things that we need for survival. Okay. So we're going to dive in and we're going to get started. Okay. So, first, ladies, give me what your thought process is as it pertains to what a blended family means to you.
I think for me, you originally when we were going to do this podcast, I was thinking, oh, like you said, Robin, that blended families are really just the kids and the parents. But you're right. When you say I do to your spouse, you're actually saying that to his family.
Hmm.
And sometimes in rare occasions, lack of family, because that can, if they don't have a solid relationship with their family, you still are blending him with your family. And so that, by default, there's a blend there. So to me, it really means just that marrying of generational traditions,
Hmm.
generational or lack of traditions, generational ethics, values, training, right? Of what you were brought up with. Or, the Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go. So ideally, if there has been training or lack of training, and that's what happens, you're going to marry that blend, right? So you can,
Yes. Yes.
ideally you're aligned in whatever you marry, you guys will be aligned. But if that's not the case, then it won't be. And so to me, a blended family is just coming together with whatever those things are, training or lack of training, of generational traditions,
Hmm.
ethics,
Hmm.
and so on. I think that's it.
Yes. Yes. Latoya.
So yeah, mine was originally like, we were all thinking it would just be the children and the husband. So you had me thinking for a second when you asked, like, what does it mean to you? I'm like, I think I need to change my definition here. But I won't because it was kind of caught me off guard, let me say. But it's good to incorporate the other family members in that. But it's really just, what God intended it to be, just really the two coming together. They're leaving, and cleaving, right? So leaving
Right.
their families, leaving their
Right.
mothers, their fathers, and coming together. And even with, it's not just coming together by yourselves, like you're coming with what you have, which are children, right? And so it's exactly what Dana was saying, generations coming together. It's a beautiful thing, I think, since I'm in a blended family.
Absolutely. So I'll speak to that point also, because we also have a blended family. So I'll tell you the challenges that we had initially. Initially, when we got married, my husband and I, he had son, two sisters that he had custody of, and I had my two children. There was like a big age gap, right? So here you are, you're dating and you get married and everything is all gone ho before you get married. And then afterwards, when everybody moves into this one house together, then there's a different dynamic because the one thing that we did not do is we did not include them in our premarital. Okay. So I think that that's kind of where the first piece kind of starts. And we're talking about if your biblical foundation is not set accordingly, and it's not done as it should be, then that's where the challenges start. So I'm going to say that we should have included our kids in the premarital to have a platform to speak how they feel about the transition. Nobody asks the kids about how they feel. Nobody explains to the children that things are going to be different. Nobody talks about what the order is going to look like after you blend these two families together. So that was our downfall. Okay. And so once we did that, there was some friction going on in the house because we didn't do that. And just know that the children will do everything in their power to put the husband and wife battle and try to push them against one another. Okay. And so that was the challenge that we had until we understood that we had to have something called that united front. That's when things kind of started to kind of merge together. So, Dana, let me ask you this question. I know you and your spouse, you all have your children together, and tell me, have you had any situations where you've had to have interactions with your in-laws where they wanted to give their input on things that you have told your children some things to do, or maybe they disagreed on some ways that you were handling them or raising them, or maybe wanted to kind of give you some advice on challenging your motherhood or your discipline or something like that? Have you ever had any situations like that?
So, because I mean, yeah, of course. So, since we've been married 37 years, I mean, we got married young. So, we were 22, 23 years old when we got married. So, clearly, we didn't really have a blueprint to follow. I say clearly because there are some people who, maybe they do have a blueprint. Maybe they did, they were wise. Because actually, I have a friend who's got married at 17, 18. They're wise. They're above their years and they got married early. But for us, we didn't, and we didn't understand a lot of things. So, of course, we accepted and we received a lot of input from various family members, including my in-laws. I don't want to just say in-laws, but even on my side, my mom and aunties, they had things that they were saying. I needed it and I welcomed it. But I think once I got rooted in God, which was a few years, and I began to understand, and really align myself with the word of God. And this took years. I'm not going to pretend like all of a sudden I'm just following this blueprint, but I began to want to do things differently than when I was raised. And I wanted a different path for my children than how I was raised. And that, some people look at that as a slap in the face to how they raised you. And, that's personal. You can't take it personal, but yeah, there was there was that conflict that took place, when we wanted to do things a certain way, and other people thought we should do things a traditional way. And that's what I mean when I said earlier, generational traditions and values coming into your marriage, because it was like, wait a minute, this is the way this family has always done it. So yeah, we had that, and of course, gently. I mean, because I was so young, I didn't come out, with an attitude like, oh no, we're not doing that. I just kind of was a silent, like, I'm not doing that, and just kind of did things the way I believe that they should have been done, and so did my husband. But as we have gotten older, there's tons of things. I can think of all type of conversations that have been had where you'll get that, the statement, you'll hear something like, everybody's done that. All the families said that. This is how it's always been. Even now, there was a situation where one of my children wanted to live, with their mate. And I'm like, well, no, that's not how I've raised them. Well, they're grown now. And just like you, let them make a decision. Well, you know what? Ultimately, they will have to make a decision, but it's still my job to parent. So parenting never ends. So I'm not going to ever, as long as I have breath in my body, tell any, not just my children, look, friends, the true friends, iron sharpen iron friends, not fair weather friends or people who get emotional, but people where we both are trying to go towards the Lord. Same with family. I'm gonna do the same. I'm going to point you back to the Lord. And I would hope the same happens to me and my family if I weren't there. You know, that somebody can point us all back to the Lord versus then simply just, telling people what they want to hear. So yeah, we had those situations. I think they're going to happen for the rest of our lives. But I think, the key is just being respectful and reminding people who we serve. I know everybody always says, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord.
Yes,
But, that
yes.
sounds good. It's a good sound bite. But I don't think you want to be haughty and prideful either.
Yeah,
I don't think you want to
absolutely.
come across as if you're, a know-it-all, but just pointing people back to the word of God and reminding them this is who we follow. So.
Absolutely. Latoya, I have a specific question for you. So, because you have a blended family, how do you balance the two, the having loyalty to your children and not creating division with your spouse? That is a challenge for some, because
Yeah.
your children, I've heard some moms say, don't nobody come before my kids, even after they get married. You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
But
yeah.
Mhm.
once again, God has an order after you get married. So give us your feedback on that, please.
Well, first things first, I think we had some really great premarital counseling that helped us. First things first, and we know that the order of the home is the husband is above the wife, wife above the kids, and we know, of course, God is above everybody.
Right.
Um, but putting that into real terms was a little difficult in the beginning. It was a little difficult in the
Mhm.
beginning simply because I want to say special needs children, if you will.
Mhm.
Or they have mental behavioral issues. So for me to try to detach myself in a sense from that and knowing that, okay, they are fine. And maybe this is a different perspective that my husband is bringing. Okay, maybe, but it did take balance and it did take communication, a lot of communication, and it took some
Mhm.
education too, because there were some things on his part he just did not know and he did not
Right.
understand.
Right.
Um, and so that was like, showing him materials, helping him to understand, like, okay, this is kind of what we have to do, routines and things like that. Cause my son is ADD and autistic. So he's like, okay,
Mhm.
routines. I can see
Mhm.
that. I can see that. Okay, he's not hyper just because he's just hyper. Okay, sit down may not be the best thing. So let's get him outside. Let's play. Let's let him lose some energy, let him loose a little bit, different things. So we just had to figure out how to communicate the best. And then again, allowing him to just, really be a part of the parenting process that I already had. And,
Right.
really just allowing God to be like, you know what? Let me kind of take my hands off a little bit. Let me allow him to be there more for my son in a sense, because he can show him how to
Mhm.
be a man, and not
Right.
to say it was less for my daughter or anything, because our blended families, I have a son and a daughter, and he has two daughters. So,
Mhm.
but not to say let him be less there for her or anything like that. It was more so just he can kind of show him some things I can't. He can kind of show her some things that maybe I can't. So maybe I can take a step back and listen too. Sometimes it's not just about their needs, because it's
Right.
about us being a unit together and what we come up with together.
Right. So I'm glad you said that, because you did say a key word. You talked about communication.
Yeah.
Something that happens in blended families is this. You have rules and then you have relationship. So I think what happens is we do them out of order, okay? Sometimes we have the blended families and we're so gung-ho on trying, okay, we got to put these rules in place because we're merging these families together,
Mhm.
when first of all, we need to build a relationship with those kids or with those in-laws or whomever we need to build a relationship with, so that we could get to know one another and have a better understanding of one another before we try to put some rules in place, especially as it pertains to our kids. I know that that was one of the mistakes that we made because, like I said, we had a big age gap. My husband's sister that he was caring for, she was 17 when we got married, not when we started dating, but when we got married, and my youngest was 5. Okay. So that's a big age group. I mean, a big age difference. So trying to put rules in place that apply to everyone was a little bit of a challenge because of the age differences, high school, middle school, and elementary. And not only us having a relationship with the kids, but them having a relationship with one another, right? So they can learn how to respect each other's boundaries, and respect the fact that us as the parents together, we have to make decisions, and we can't pick sides, right? And you understand that when you have children here that you brought, children here that he brought, and your family of origin might be a little bit different, right? So the kids do that. Sometimes they feel like you're picking sides and you're choosing sides. And so once again, that united front is the part that we have to stay committed to. So, Dana, talk to me about loyalty in your family, because for me, I think that relationship is very important. And when you have a decision that you have to make uh, for your children, and like you said earlier, you have outside people who might not agree with what you're deciding to do, um, you and your husband, you all discuss probably everything, and you decide together what you're going to do and the decisions that are made in your household, regardless of what everybody else thinks and how everybody else feels. How do you guys handle that in your household? What do you do? And what keeps you grounded so that you don't navigate from that foundational piece that you have with loyalty in your family?
It's not hard. I guess if you're talking about the kids, I lost my mom. So when my mom passed, I didn't have that whole I'm gonna go home to my mom back like I did when I was
Yeah.
in my 20s, and we don't really have to worry. I don't know that my in-laws on this side necessarily. I guess when you talk about loyalty, when there's decisions to be made,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there was issues where they would kind of bypass me to go to him,
Mm-hmm.
and ask for permission to, I don't know, use our house is a good one that I don't want to get too specific, but, do things that I think should include both of us in the decision
Right.
making.
Right.
And I think it was important, as you said, Robin, to communicate to my husband. I felt a little bit overlooked or, bypassed, a little bit, disrespected when those
Mm-hmm.
things would happen. So just
Mm-hmm.
communicating to him, because I think he may not have understood, right? You got, family members he's been with for all his life on one side that he's trying to navigate, while also trying to navigate his loyalty to me. When it comes to the children, I think, like you said as well, making sure that we are on one page together when there are decisions to be made, because
Mm-hmm.
children just um, inherently will try to, I won't say manipulate, but pit parents against each other, so maybe it is manipulate. But, they know who to ask about certain things. My children know who to ask about for money. They know who to
Yes.
ask about, bending
Yes.
the rules. And so when you say, again, loyalty, it's being loyal to the boundaries that we should set, that, for each other and for our home, so that no one could divide and break up what we have decided to do as relates to
Mm-hmm.
rules or standards or how we, divvy out money or whatever. So
Right. Yeah, because that happens sometimes when you have a family member before you get married, maybe you were assisting them in some type of way. And after you get married, then all of a sudden if you're helping them, especially financially, they look at you like, oh, well, you can't help me now. Oh, because your wife said you can't help me, or because your husband said you can't do that. Those boundaries have to be set and they have to be made and they have to be clear because it can cause some um, unbalanced. It can cause some um, uneasy feelings when you see family members because even though they don't ask you why, some of them don't even understand, although they say they're Christian, they should understand what it looks like to be married and what happens when the two people merge together as one, that it's not individual. We're not single. We are together. And you know that our decision making is together. And so why are you upset? Because I said to you, well, let me talk to my spouse before I let you borrow some money or let you borrow the car or co-sign on something. They get so angry and so upset. So I don't understand that part, but they want to blame the other person for the decision that you decided to say, look, this is now ours and not mine, which is true because the two shall become one, and you're not supposed to choose the areas where the oneness is. It's supposed to be in every area of our marriage, finances, all the things. And they just stand up and make a decision. Well, I got more mouths to feed, so I can't give you money every single month to help you pay your bills. Let's help you understand how to be more responsible with your finances so I don't have to do that. So those are some of the challenges that also come with blending your families together. Okay, great. So now let's talk through, give us some feedback on ideas that you may have when you decide that you are going to marry someone and you all know that you have a blended family. Give me some things and some ideas that you can do to prepare for that before you all merge everything together. What did you ladies do, or what do you think you can do to kind of help make that a more peaceful merge or, situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be communication. Number one, you're going to have to know a little bit about your spouse. It can't just be, hey, I'm just going to jump into this thing. I know that, they say love is blind and all that's nice and wonderful, but truth be told, you can run into a few things. Because I know one thing as far as premarital counseling, we did talk about our family histories. And that's not something we had previously discovered or like just really talked about and dug into, even though me and my spouse, we were friends before we were ever romantic. We were cool. Like, so I kind of been around some of the family or whatever, not very much. We kicked it, our kids kicked it together. It was, kind of thing. So we already had a relationship with each other's children because we were around. And little things like that. But yeah, if you definitely have children, I'm with you as far as building a relationship with the other children. I think that you should have a friendship. You should have some type of like a love or things that you can always go back to that you do together. And then, you want to talk about your family histories. You want to talk about that, just like, hey, this is the dynamic that's going on with my family. This dynamic going on with my family. This is how we kind of do things. These are some of the traditions, and then things that maybe you want to do together, because we started to create our own traditions. Like, okay, this is what I want to do every year. I don't want to do everything that the family does. So we started to create our own things, and we just had to talk about that. It was kind of like an exercise, one of our talks in our premarital counseling, where we were like, what, I think we could do our own thing here and there. So we created our own traditions, and then when we came down to finances, we just like decided, okay, well, do we want joint accounts, separate accounts, how we want to do it? So we have both joint and separate accounts. So we have that, and not to be secretive, we have access to everything, but that's just the way we decided to do it, since we have, I have businesses and things like that, and, he has his businesses and things like that too. So we just decided to keep it that way.
Okay. Any words on that, Dana?
I think you pretty much covered boundaries. Just setting boundaries, is the biggest thing. And then I think if you're young, you do have to, if as best as you can, come up with the expectations that you have for each other, as relates to external family members, if you have children, because everybody won't have children that has, as you mentioned, blended family,
Right.
but just expectations of what it looks like. I think that's a good point that Toya made. Traditions is a good example. Holidays, we like to travel. Some people feel like, no, we all should get together. And then there's that, oh, they don't want to be with us sometimes is the feel. Yeah, when it has nothing to do with you. We're just trying to get away. So that's an example of a tradition of how we may do things. So, and the reality of it is that some things you're going to be learning as you grow together that are new. We've been married
Yes.
30 plus years, and there's still sometimes those new things that come up. And that's where you have to really communicate. I think that's the biggest thing, and then set the boundaries. And hopefully you both agree that those boundaries should absolutely integrate, the spirit of the Lord with it, right? Whereas, you
Yeah.
invite him in to make that decision
Mhm.
as it relates to them. I know Timothy talks about, helping your own household first, right? And I know some people can technically think that means inwardly, but I believe that also means family as well. So, helping your family, what that looks like for you both, right? Especially when it comes to finances, right? What's enough?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
sometimes I have to
Mhm.
get real practical. Okay, let's say, you know, my brother asked this or your mother asked this, or is this equal? Are we gonna give
Mhm.
this, I don't know,
Mhm.
throw a number out, 5K for each one? Are we gonna
Right, right.
make a difference when it relates to one person versus another? So that's what I would say, boundaries. And then if you have an idea of the expectations going in on like traditions, sharing those with each other.
Okay, awesome. So we know that when we blend our families together, we have to have discipline. And I don't know how you ladies feel, but I know that sometimes there can be some challenges in an area when you are the stepmom or the stepdad and you're having to discipline your spouse's child, especially when they're not present, and having to do that in a way where they don't feel like you're picking on them, feel it, helping them understand that you're doing it out of love and because I'm not going to do anything to you that I wouldn't do to my own children. But once again, children have their ways of making you think that you are doing something that is wrong. So, step parent versus biological parent. Give me some insight on that, ladies. What are your thoughts as it pertains to that?
I'm gonna defer that to Latoya.
Yeah. I really think that goes back to relationship, right? If that child trusts you, then they're gonna know that what you're doing is not for harm. Not to say that they won't try to manipulate a situation. Now, I'm not saying that, but
Mhm.
it's bigger than, okay, this is what's happening. So for me personally, it's more so I've never struck my, step kids or anything, like hit them, but it has been like, okay, I'm taking your phone. Like you're not going to
Mhm.
have this while you're here because you're not going to be disrespecting me or whatever the case may be. Whatever it was, there was an equal thing. Me and hubby talk about it, and I'm like, okay, so what you want to say? Oh, we're going to have a talk about this together. We're going to go and because I'm backing you up. That's what it's about.
Okay.
So the
Okay.
real parent or the biological parent, let me not say real, the biological parent is going to be the key. You are the key to be able to speak to your child and back up your spouse, the step parent, as they are right, right? So I think that, whatever your family is going to decide to do, that's what that is. Now, I will, with my children, but I've never struck them. Like I said, it was going to be something where I'm taking something away from you. You're here to have fun and enjoy yourself. So I'm going to take some of that enjoyment away because you're not going to do something that's wrong and then expect to be rewarded for bad behavior. We don't do that. That is a saying in our household. We do not reward bad behavior. And
Right.
so with that, there has to be some type of consequence that will equate what has happened. And again, as far as we are concerned, that's how it happens. As far as, look, I'm backing you up, and vice versa. When it's my kids, I'm not around. He'll take a phone or something like that and be like, okay, he likes to do extra chores. He was like, okay, let's get out in this backyard and let's, blow the leaves, or let's, wipe down the windows or something. Let's wash your mama car. Like, we're gonna do some extra stuff because you're not going to just loosely, it's not gonna be okay with you doing what you did. And then when I get back, then we're gonna have a conversation because I'm gonna back him up too. You're not right. It's not right for whatever reasons. And we will communicate that with our kids. That's not a luxury we had to get an explanation on things as far as when we got in trouble. It was just you got your discipline and that was that.
That was
But
it.
we wanted to make sure our children understood, like, hey, this was wrong. This is why it was wrong or how it was wrong. And this is what you can do to make it better. And this is your consequence. And that's
So
how
you know that we do have, our audience that's listening, and some of the struggles and challenges that some marriages do have with blended families is the fact that, and a lot of times, unfortunately, it happens with the moms where they get married and they do not want the spouse to discipline their children. Okay. And it makes it hard for you to have a successful marriage when your children can only be disciplined by you, but they're being disrespectful within the household that everybody is a part of. Okay. So you just said that your husband backs you up and he backs you up. So what about a situation when that child comes and says something to you? Well, I'm gonna go tell my daddy on you, you know, and you'll have children, what they do, they go and they tell their side of the story. And have you ever been in a position to where you all did not agree on maybe the discipline, or maybe the
yeah.
child took the daddy's side and you all did not agree? How did you handle that situation?
Yeah, so the thing that we agreed on, because we didn't do it perfectly at first, we would have the disagreement in front of the kid and be like, no, this is the way I see it, and this is the way I see it. But we had to communicate to agree. We would never do that in front of the kids. We are never going to disagree or argue in front of the kids. So
Yeah.
for that time being, the dynamic will be, okay, look, we're gonna have a conversation about this. You go do what you got to do, talk to that kid or whatever separately, the biological parent would, and then we would have our conversation separate. But yeah, it definitely has happened. But now we are so good at it. Thank the Lord. That, it took practice, because it was like, again, with me having special need kids, there were certain things I was like, okay, this is not right or fair. When it's something that's happening this way, this is not intent, right? This is just a mannerism he doesn't understand, like sarcasm, for example. My son would not get that for anything. He would think you were serious if you were being sarcastic with him. So he would do the literal thing you were saying to do. And so it would kind of cause confusion. But it was like,
Okay.
it's not really that. It's not him being disrespectful too, because I don't know if a lot of people know autistic kids, they are very straight to the point. They're very like, why do you do that? I don't understand. Like, what's going on? And it's not to be out of disrespect, but they're just truly curious. They really want to understand how it works. And so I know how some parents who are really just authoritarians and very disciplinarians, they don't like questions from children. It is not something that is inviting, or it feels like disrespect, I guess I would say, to some of those parents. And so it's like, this is not disrespect. This is just kind of what it is that he does. But as he's grown up, he's grown out of a lot of things, which is good. God, once again. And then us being just in communication and being able to say, okay, we're not going to have disagreements in front of the kids. We will say, okay, as the biological parent, I will talk with them about the right and wrongs of it. And then I will talk with my husband about, hey, this is the way in which we need to address this moving forward because of X, Y, and Z, because I'm giving him, feedback and background or whatever the case may be, and vice versa. He would tell it with me too, because our children both have, both sides, they have triggers, or they have, things that we may not have been made aware of in the beginning. So we always want to handle our children with care and love them well. We want to love our children well. So that's kind of how we do it.
Okay. So Dana, let me ask you, I need to get some insight from you. I know you don't have a blended family, but I'm sure you have some friends or family members that may have a blended family. And with you being a person on the outside looking in, are there some things that you notice differently about families that are blended in reference to how they function, how they handle situations versus when you have the same children, they're all biologically you and your husbands. Do you notice anything different between the
That's a
two
tough one.
families?
I can't say that I really do. That's one of those I really would have to think about to answer truthfully. And with, some significance, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. I listen to people when they're talking about, coming together and, I've heard things like that's your child or my child. I do appreciate when I hear things like bonus children, to make people feel, or bonus mom, to make people feel
Mhm.
unified. I think those sort of things are important. So I can only say that I've listened to differences that I don't necessarily relate to.
Okay.
But like bonus children or bonus, kids.
Mhm.
But I think ultimately, no, I haven't seen anything that is significantly different, um, that that's troublesome to me. Mhm.
And that's a good thing. And the reason why I say that is because we try to help people understand that the same situations, the same disagreements, the same arguments that you have with a blended family, you can have those same experiences when you have the same biological children. And so I think that we as parents or people, we create the separation by what you just said, Dana. That's his child or that's my child by doing that rather than creating a union in love and creating that foundation to show God's love. Because yes, you have yours, I have mine, but we're now creating the oneness. And so to me, all of those labels need to go away once you make the decision to blend the families together. I
Together.
was so glad.
You know what? And I say that I actually, I think I just, it's call it aging. There is one that I now has been brought to me that I can think of. I have a really, in fact, I won't say her name, but she's a really close friend of mine. And her children, her bonus children are adult children, and they've graduated
Mm,
college. And they live with her. Fast forward, she's married to a blended, to her husband, who, she didn't have any kids, but these are his kids. In short, I'm gonna just simply say, when you have young adult children and they're living in your home with your spouse,
mm,
and they have their own ways of wanting to do things, and you're trying to now direct them. I think, we've kind of talked about this already. You want your spouse to be in agreement with you. So if it's a situation, there was a situation where one didn't, wasn't adamant about getting a job after college, bottom line. And the expectations when you're at home, how you're going to spend your day. Should you be on social media all day? That's where it can get real gray. And honestly, I think that's almost about any decision, even if they're your own, to be quite frank with you. When you have a decision to make, how much money do you give, a child? Right. You're still
yeah.
blending that. I can talk about me and my husband when we're talking about how much money we want to give one of our own natural children. He may say, well, I think this number is good. I may say, I think that number is good. But if he has his ethics, I have my ethics, and you're trying to blend that from how he grew up versus how I grew up, it's still a blended family that's trying to come to one solution. So it can be magnified when you're talking about, someone else's children, but how you make those decisions is going to always ideally go back to the principles of God. And you're going to have to communicate. And I think Toya said it best. In the meantime, you're going to have to try to get through it and not argue and not be divided, while you are in the midst of trying to come to a solution. But if you guys weren't like clones growing up, you're going to have different thoughts. And then
Yeah.
blendedness is just more complicated because you've already, lived this way, over here we do it like this, over here we do it like that. But it's probably more complicated there, but it's the same things that happen in a normal home. You're blending like you said in the beginning, Robin, the two shall become one. That becoming part is a blending
Yeah.
Yes,
of
Yeah.
all the
it is.
traditions are non-traditions.
Yes.
So talk about anything, money, talk about how you spend your time, talk about how how you get over a solution, talk about work ethics. It's going to
Mhm.
be a blending of
Yes.
ideologies from when you grew up. So, I kind of backtracked a little bit, but I think ultimately, I'm not to simplify it, it really comes down to, that communication and that maturity, as Latoya talked about, of not, going head to head while you're waiting on ways to give a good solution.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah, so I'll just
absolutely.
say this Bible verse as you were talking, Dana,
Yes.
Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And so, as we
Mm.
know, like you said, going head to head and bumping, like you're not going to create great solutions out of anger. So I think that, just if we're both humble and just like, what, we know we both see this differently. And if we can't really agree from our history, past, or whatever, then we create something new. Like, okay, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do to resolve this for the betterment of our family?
Absolutely. Because the children, um, we are creating what their family of origin is going to look like, right?
That's right.
So they're going to be a product of what we create within that household. So that's the one thing that I like to share with everybody, and we like to establish, especially when it comes to the foundational piece. What you do is going to determine what these people are going to be when they become adults. So be very mindful how you handle the situation. The one thing that I do know is that learning to have that piece of communication and building the relationship and understanding their needs as well. I feel like the children do have a voice. I think you should allow them to express how they feel in the situation, especially when you're blending the family together. I think it's okay if you say, so what do you think about us, getting married, and you're gonna have some, as Dana says, bonus siblings. How does it make you feel?
Yeah.
And allow them to express that, because they might say, well, I feel anxious, or well, what's gonna change? What's gonna be different? Do I have to share a room? We don't know what their anxieties are. So when we don't create that environment for them to express how they feel, and they push their feelings down, when we merge everything together, I feel like that's where the chaos kind of starts, because they have a voice and we haven't allowed them to say how they feel. And when we don't do that, we can't start to create the peace in the house by helping them have a smooth transition. Sometimes they just want to know, what is this going to look like? What is my role going to be? What part am I going to play? How are we going to put these puzzle pieces together? What's going to happen? And sitting them down and explaining the order in the household, explaining what the discipline is going to look like, explaining that, yes, this is your step bonus, whatever name you want to call mom or dad or whatever. And this is how we're going to create this oneness in this household, sitting them down together and doing that, but allowing them that time and creating that environment to speak freely about how they feel about the situation. I just think wholeheartedly that that was the mistake that we made, because we did not allow that, because they have feelings. And when we don't allow them to say what they want to say, they just express them in a way that they should not. I'll just say that. It could be anger, it could be acting out with discipline things. And then later on down the line, you'll hear some say, well, nobody asked me, or nobody's, y'all should have just said this. You just could have said A, B, C, and D, and it's all about what Latoya keeps saying, that C word, communication, building the relationships, creating the environment so that everybody can be at peace with the thing that's new, not just for the husband and wife, but it's new for everybody who is going to be under this same roof and umbrella.
But I would say outside the roof too, because I got a cousin who was divorced. His mother-in-law was constantly in his marriage with
Mm,
his wife. They end up getting divorced because he felt like his wife was listening to everything the mother was doing. So there was clearly some issues there in terms of, again, those expectations. First of all, and it goes back to what even Toya was said, good marital counseling and understanding the boundaries, something that I mentioned earlier of how this household should look versus outside this household. So they end up getting divorced after about 15 years of marriage because she always, the mother, had a say in what was going on in their home. So ideally, I mean, that's ideally, right? If you have if you got married in a good, healthy way, then you can say, hey, just like you said, Robin, what goes on in this home is for this home. Outside here, you guys may want to do it that way, respectfully, those same sort of understandings. But in here, this is how we do it. It's the same way. Unfortunately, though, if you did not get married the right way, right? And what's not the right way? You really probably were just, maybe we're too young,
Y'all
immature,
figure it out.
all the things, right? All the
Yes.
things, you're going to have some conflict because
Yeah.
they weren't, it didn't happen until it happened. And now when it happens, if you guys weren't on the same page, hopefully you can get through the ebb and flow of what that's going to look like. It's going to be some roughing because the sharpening hopefully is going to sharpen you into what God would have you to do, and you get in that order that you were talking about. If you don't get in that order, well, then that's where you get this divorce, because you got, just like that situation, you got a woman who's now aligned with the mama where she didn't cleave to the husband, or vice versa. It could be a son who didn't cleave to the wife. So you got that disorder that's just happening.
Yeah, so I would say too, just the blending, and I think this is even if you are not a blended family, even if you're, like you're saying, like the coming together as one, Dana, like even though y'all aren't a blended family, I think we are all in the midst of trying to really create a marriage and a life that maybe we don't even have an example for, or language for, or community for. There are certain levels of that, I believe, is true. Like no matter where you come from, when you do become one with someone else, no matter what that looks like, or who that is, it's going to be that coming together. It's like, you know what, maybe this didn't work for me traditionally, or maybe that didn't work for my husband traditionally, but maybe we can come together and create something brand new, right? So that we don't have, there's no blueprint for it.
Right.
Nobody taught us this because we are creating it. And sometimes that could be the friction, but like you said, the sharpening of that, that's the prayer that will help build a stronger marriage moving forward.
Yep, ladies. Well, I think that we all have our ideas of what a blended family dynamic is and what it looks like. I know we are basically out of time, but what I will say before we leave the audience is that, ladies, the one thing that we have to stay consistent with is knowing that regardless of what the family dynamic is, God can heal anything and everybody. He is able to rebuild that family to be what it needs to be. So keeping him in the center of it all is going to be the solution to whatever your dynamic is in your household. So that's it, ladies. All right. I enjoyed you all today. Until next time, keep it holy, sis.
Yes. And as always, y'all keep following us on TikTok and YouTube at Keep It Holy Sis PC, and Instagram and Facebook at Keep It Holy Sis. And as always, keep it holy.